Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Cadet Nicole Capel, United States Military Academy, class of 2015, fingers crossed, aspiring aviator. This morning, I have the honor of introducing veterans of the first African-American aviation unit in United States military history, the Tuskegee Airmen. These men overcame segregation and discrimination in order to proudly serve their nation. We have the distinct pleasure of hearing from a few of these dedicated and determined men, including Jim Pryde, former radio operator of the Tuskegee Airmen; Dr. Ivan Ware, former airman of the 33rd Fighter Group; Major Anderson, former ground support serviceman for the Tuskegee Airmen; Bill Fontroy, former pilot cadet for the Tuskegee Airmen; and finally, Stephen McCoy, chairman of the Speakers Bureau. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me in welcoming these brave men of the Tuskegee Airmen.
Well, good morning, everyone. How are we this morning? Excellent, excellent. Well, first I'd like to thank the wonderful introduction that General Balakis gave us, and I'd like to go ahead and give him a round of applause again. Thank you. I also like to thank Cadet Nicole Cable for her wonderful introduction of us. The Tuskegee Airmen seated here and I would like to welcome you to this panel discussion about the history and legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen. We wish to thank the American Veterans Center for allowing us to speak with you this morning in this wonderful venue. We wish to express our special thanks to our contact within the American Veterans Center, Wes Smith. Please feel free to chat with our donors at the completion of our panel this morning. I'd like to start off with a brief introduction. Seated before you, you have Dota Ivan Ware, Bill Fontroy, and Major Anderson. This morning, they are here to represent the 16,000 to 19,000 men and women who are part of the Tuskegee Airmen story. During World War II, it is often referred to as the Tuskegee experience. This morning, I'd like to start with the definition of a Tuskegee Airman. A Tuskegee Airman is any person, man or woman, military or civilian, black or white, who served at Tuskegee Army Airfield in any or at any of the other locations that supported programs stemming from the Tuskegee experience between 1941 through 1949. All these individuals are considered as Tuskegee Airmen. The Tuskegee experience that we will be discussing was a unique and extremely important development in race relations in the history of our country for black citizens and the nation as a whole. It established in 1941, through political and legal maneuverings, America's ability to be enlightened and to be challenged. To appreciate the significance of the Tuskegee experience, it is necessary for it to be viewed through the content of the American racial climate and the timing that it was executed. The impetus of establishing a flying program for blacks began at the beginning of World War II as a consequence of black discontent resulting from decades of maltreatment as second-class citizens, and specifically the denial of opportunities to serve our country in the military in jobs other than service or labor. In the face of strong resistance from the military establishment and most officials in the War Department, a relentless effort was carried on by a number of black organizations and a sympathetic white minority to persuade the government to accept blacks for military aviation training in the Army Air Corps. After considerable debate on the subject, the government agreed to establish a program in which blacks would be trained in all aspects of military aviation. Morton Field, Tuskegee, Alabama was selected to conduct the flight training for pilots. The first class, which was designated 42C, began with 13 trainees, 12 cadets, and 1 military officer. Their training started on July 19, 1941. Of the 13 students that began that initial training, 5 graduated from the final training and received their wings on March 7th, 1942. The first 5 graduates were Captain Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., future commander of the 99th and 332nd Fighter Groups, and later, the first black U.S. Air Force general. Second Lieutenant Lemieux R. Curtis, Second Lieutenant Charles DeBow, Second Lieutenant George S. Roberts, and Second Lieutenant Mac Ross. One of the key evolutions to getting to this point was in 1941, First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, at the urgings of her close friend and social activist Mary McLeod Bethune, moved to help expand the pilot training program at Tuskegee, Alabama. In March of that year, Eleanor Roosevelt not only visited the Tuskegee Institute's Moton Field, but incredibly, and against the advice of her Secret Service detail, she asked the chief flight instructor, Charles A. Chief Anderson, to take her on a flight. This single act of flying the First Lady for more than an hour had great symbolic value to the advocates of black military aviation. It brought a visibility to Tuskegee's pilot training program. This, in turn, helped open the door for the deployment of black military aviation units to the European theater. Unfortunately, they still were in segregated units. In a total, there were 2,483 pilot trainees that entered training in Tuskegee, Alabama, of which 992 graduated earning their wings as pilots from 1942 through 1946. There were 352 pilots that deployed to the European Theater of Operations. They flew the P-39, P-40, P-47, and finally the P-51 Mustang with the 99 and 332nd Fighter Groups. The technical training of the ground crews was conducted at Chanute Army Airfield in Illinois. At Chanute, the enlisted personnel were quartered together in World War I era barracks, separated from the main base. A portion of the barracks was divided to provide a separate space for the trainees to eat, sleep, and study. At the onset, the Tuskegee Army Airfield was under the direction of a white command staff and flight instructors. After a couple of false starts, the Army Air Corps made an excellent selection of a base commander in the person of Lieutenant Colonel, later Brigadier General, Noel F. Parrish. Colonel Parrish applied his broad knowledge and understanding of racial problems and concerns during his command of the base. He devoted his heart and soul to providing a fair opportunity for military aviation in the cadet trainees. Colonel Parrish's job was extremely difficult. He had to comply with the War Department's regulations requiring segregation. He also had to maintain some level of segregation on the base to keep the base's white complement contented, as well as the racially intolerant population of Alabama that surrounded the base. Meanwhile, along with the racial pressures, the cadets of Tuskegee were subjected to the standard, rigid military training and discipline similar to that experienced by cadets at military academies. The mental and physical stresses that were prevalent throughout the Air Corps was specifically designed to test each cadet's respect for authority, commitment to duty, and honor. It also prepared them for the rigors that they would experience later in their military careers while in combat. Over the period of a year, Colonel Parrish was able to remove the first doubts about black performance in the Air Corps. It was a resounding success. Blacks could be taught, trained to fly, fight, and maintain aircraft to the same standards that the Air Corps was applying to all of its aviation units. Now moving on to their combat record. The Airmen's combat achievements include the destruction of enemy aircraft during dogfighting and on the ground, destruction of airfields, rail traffic, oil refineries, ammunition depots, as well as the destruction of one destroyer by machine gun fire. The outstanding performance of the ground crews, armorers, ordnance, and other technicians, as well as the administration staff, was critical to the success of these pilots in combat. To give you an idea how effective they were, while operating with the 12th Air Force, they flew 6,381 combat sorties. From June 1943 to May 1944. They flew 9,152 combat sorties in support of the 15th Air Force from June 1944 to May 1945. They flew 179 escort missions for bomber escort. The key to remember with this is during that era, the loss of a single bomber was 10 men lost. The United States at that time could put together aircraft quickly. The loss of highly trained individuals to man those aircraft and operate those aircraft in combat was the real loss. And the Tuskegee Airmen fought to ensure that that capability was maintained by our warfighting forces. Their total combat sorties was 15,533. Total aerial kills was 112. I'd like to ask everyone here a question at this point in our presentation. How many of you have heard that the Tuskegee Airmen never lost a bomber under their escort? Okay. Gentlemen, education time. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you that the myth of never losing a bomber is false. The total number of bombers lost while under escort by the Tuskegee Airmen was 27. This is going through Air Force records, both on the enemy side and our side. By comparison, the average number of bombers lost while under other P-51 squadron protections in theater was 46 for the same period of time. So even though they did lose aircraft, their effectiveness showed that they were a bit in a stretch above the average P-51 unit in theater at that time. Please feel free to pass that information on. To date, 66 Tuskegee pilots gave the ultimate sacrifice and were killed in North Africa and European combat zones. Additionally, 32 were shot down and captured and later repatriated after the war. A little known side note was that the Air Corps also had a bombing group made up of black airmen. They were the 477th Bombardment Group at Selfridge Army Airfield. They trained black pilots, navigators, bombardiers, radio men, and ground support staff on the operation and maintenance of the twin-engine B-25 Mitchell medium bomber. The unit was programmed to deploy to the Pacific Theater, but they never deployed due to the ending of the war. I'd like to touch base on another aspect of the Tuskegee Airmen that doesn't get a lot of light. Women's contributions to the Tuskegee Airmen. Unfortunately, most of us see Hollywood and their idea of what the Tuskegee Airmen are. In reality, it was very different. As the Tuskegee Airmen fought in the skies of World War II, they were supported by a dedicated and often forgotten cadre of women. They were nurses, mechanics, supply and ferry pilots, and secretaries. They nursed injured bodies and injured souls. They packaged and repackaged parachutes, cleared land for runways and base buildings, delivered supplies, and did many other duties to help keep a base operational. When black activists urged President Truman to desegregate the military in 1948, they pointed to the example of the heroism of the Red Tails, their air crews, ground crews, and base support staff. Many of those personnel were women. The actions of black servicemen and women had proved that they had earned the right for equal treatment enjoyed by all loyal Americans. It's important at this point in time to note this one aspect, and please, this is what I'd love for you to carry away with you. Without the bold imagination of Mary McLeod Bethune, the sheer stubbornness of her friend and fellow visionary First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, and numerous unrecognized women warriors, it is doubtful that the Tuskegee Airmen would have come into existence or been as successful as they were. At this point in time, I have a few questions for the gentlemen on our boards. I would like to ask Mr. Pryde to please come down. Mr. Pryde is one of our distinguished dotas. And, okay, that's fine. Excellent. Okay. I'd like to ask the first question of Mr. Fauntleroy.
Youngest guy up here except for Pryde.
Mr. Fauntleroy? Please give us one moment, folks.
Now you, okay.
Okay. Mr. Fauntleroy, just a quick question here. Where are you from?
Washington, D.C., Columbia Hospital for Women. That's where I was born.
Okay.
Several years ago.
Not too long ago. Mr. Fauntleroy, what was your inspiration when you first left home?
We had an officer in the police department here, Sidat Singh, who was an All-American football and basketball player. And you can look at me and see that I was interested in basketball.
Oh, no doubt.
Yeah. I idolized that gentleman. After my father, he was the greatest man that I knew. He joined the Tuskegee Airmen shortly after the war started, graduated, and was killed in an airplane accident in Michigan. He was my inspiration. Of course, I was just 15 years old when the war started. By the time I turned 17, I decided that I didn't want to go in the Navy. So I went to 11th and New York Avenue to the bus station where they recruited in the Army. And I, with the permission of my mother, asked if I could go in the Army Air Corps. They gave me a test. Apparently, I passed it, to my mother's surprise. And I went off to Bowling Field to take a physical, psychological, psychomotive, and some other test. And on February the 1st, 1944, I was sworn in the Army Air Corps Reserves. May of 1945, I was sworn into the Army Air Corps because I turned 18 in March. I went to Keesler Field, took some more tests, and to my surprise, I passed and was sent up to Tuskegee Army Airfield as a pre-aviation cadet. I stayed there until May of 1945. I was put in class 45I. Now, you mentioned 42. Well, 45I was my class. And for you folk that don't know it, the war ended when they found out 45I was being trained. That's not true, but that's what we like to think. I was able to go through 3 of the 4 phases to become a pilot before they declared a surplus, and I was discharged at Andrews Army Air Corps Base November the 8th. Tomorrow's my anniversary, 1945. The main thing about my training, I'd like to think, is that the gentleman who went over before me came back and taught me. My instructor in basic flying was Captain Leonard Jackson out of Fort Worth, Texas. He came back and taught me how to fly the AT-6 and how to do combat fighting, night flying, cross country. And those men came back and they taught me well. They taught us well. I guess my other claim to fame is that in primary, my first check ride, you guys or girls who are interested in flying, knowing that after 20 hours of flying, they're going to give you a test. And the test is for you to prove that you learn what your instructor is supposed to have taught you. My first check ride was with C. Alfred Anderson, Chief Anderson, who happened to have taken Mrs. Roosevelt up. Now, I didn't know any of this until I came out of the service. But, man, was that a big deal with me when I found out that that was the man that took me up and gave me my first check. I am very proud to be associated with the Tuskegee Airmen. All of these gentlemen are idols of mine. But to you young people, my God has done with me what I've done. I didn't do it alone. Thank you.
I'd like to ask Mr. Pryde. Mr. Pryde, what was your inspiration when you were growing up, and where are you from?
I'm from Washington, D.C. also,
Homeboy.
and my inspiration was the local African-American newspapers. About every other week or so, there would be a photo of a Tuskegee Airmen event. And when I was about 16 years old, I decided I wanted to be one of them. I wanted to fly. And like everybody else at that time, we all wanted to serve our country. Our country at the time was 160 million people. 1/10 of them, 16 million, went to war. I am very pleased to be a Tuskegee Airman, but I want everybody to know there were lots of other firsts for African Americans during World War II.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. My next question is for Dr. Ware. Dr. Ware, please tell us where you're from, and also, did you dream of joining the military when you were young? If not, what would you inspiring to be?
You didn't prep me for that one. Well, what was the question again?
Did you dream on joining the military when you were young?
No, I didn't dream on joining the military when I was young. I found out after I came out of the military that my grandfather had been a military person in the Civil War, but I found that out later that I had a heritage, a military heritage. I was just unaware of that. I was in junior college in my sophomore year of junior college. It's only 2 years there, so I was in my final year of junior college when the war broke out. And of course, our whole class of 6 guys, we went down to the reception, well, it wasn't a reception center, it was a place where you could sign up. We hadn't drafted, but we were enlisting people and enlarging the military services in the 40s. And there was nothing that was unusual. We just thought that this was the way that most young Americans reacted. We were all athletes. We played ball and baseball in the summer, football in the fall. But whatever the normal things that young men did, we thought we were doing. But the exception came when you completed high school. Everybody, it was compulsory to complete high school. So if you had any ambitions, and practically everybody had ambitions to go on, it was beyond high school. Well, there are many problems. There weren't that many schools. And if you had to go some distance, then you had to maintain yourself while you were going to school. So I selected, not out of choice, but forced choice, to go to a junior college. It was only 7 miles from home, but it gave you everything that a regular college would give you academically. And in my sophomore year there, I got my call to active duty. It was an honor to me to join the Enlisted Reserve Corps. We first started up because there was a war going on, and you wanted to be a part of something, and they said, no, stay out, get your college training, get as much education as you can, then join up. That way you'll be of more use to the service. And I tried to do that. However, in my sophomore year in junior college, my final year, I was called to active duty as an enlisted reservist. That was what I got for joining the Enlisted Reserve Corps. It was to stay out until I completed my education. Well, it worked out just as they said. Junior college is only 2 years. So at the end of my sophomore year, myself and the other 4 gentlemen who were members of Monmouth Junior College, we all went down and reported for active duty because we all had joined the Enlisted Reserve Corps prior. I was in the service, I think, about 3 weeks when they gave us an opportunity to ask questions and get whatever answers we needed, and I wanted to find out how I could get from the Army to the Air Corps. And the answer was, forget it. And that was the best advice that they could have given me because there was no way to get out or to change at that time. But in a short period of time, I was on the Atlantic Ocean in November, and we were fired on twice on our way to England, but we landed there. A majority of the ships made it through. We were not an exception. After about 5 months in England, we were just about ready to hit the channel. And finally, General Eisenhower gave the order. And the largest assembly of ships in the history of warfare and of mankind took off and headed for France. I don't know what went on there. We were just standing in line day after day waiting for your outfit to be called. And about the 3rd week, we got our call. We went to Southampton and boarded up to go to France. Well, we didn't know where we were going, but we landed at the primary landing point for American GIs. There were several beaches. Americans had Omaha and Utah Beach. We actually landed at Omaha. The British had their beaches. It was not a difficult thing as a young man to adapt to the military life. It was demanding, but we had somewhat of a family history. My grandfather had been in the service. I didn't know too much about that, but we were just responding to the things that went on around us. The rest of our buddies were signing up, so it was only natural for you to want to be a part of what was going on. I did not intend to be a professional military person, but after World War II, coming back to school, I needed to have as many funds as I had in order not to have to take a full-time job. And the Well, with the government's package for GIs, your GI benefits would give you a certain amount of money, but it wasn't enough. They took care of the payments to the school, but you had to live off it was $60 a month. Well, a growing male or female, for that matter, would find it very difficult to manage on $60-some a month. So I took ROTC. That gave me some additional money, and it was just enough to make ends meet. And with my military service, ROTC was something that I enjoyed doing. It was expanding what I had learned from scratch, leadership. I realized when I was taking ROTC, the tremendous leadership among the men that I had served with. A young first sergeant who was 27 years old, never been in the service before, was our leader. Everything that I learned was learning by experience. And as I said, I never looked forward to having a career in the force, but once I got out of college and had a commission and examined my possibilities, used the experience that I had, 3.5 years of service to start with, and go back in the service, not as a staff sergeant, which I retired as, but as a second lieutenant. And I knew all about second lieutenants by that time. It was not a difficult choice, and I've never regretted it, and I would recommend it to all of you. I'm really inspired as I look out and I see so many crisp young uniforms. I was not the neatest soldier. We were a medium automotive maintenance company. We repaired trucks, vehicles, Jeeps, and if it had wheels on it, we could repair it. And we did. We did that for 2.5 years in Europe. We didn't win the war, but we made our contribution to the war effort. And we were proud of that. Some of the edge was taken off when we got back to the States. We had to readjust to what we had left in the States. But that was what everybody had to bear. So it was not unusual. But I think I've said enough. We need to hear from you, sir.
My next question is going to go to Major Anderson. The good thing about it is you never lose your rank, Major. Major, please tell us where you're from. And also, when did you decide to get involved with the military?
My name is Major Anderson. Major is my first name.
Never got a promotion.
It's not a military rank. The name my parents gave me. I was born March 5th, 1925. It makes me 89 years old today. That's to be able to be here with you today and speak to you. While in the military, I was enlisted. Can you hear me?
Other one. I think that one's working.
While in the military, I was an enlisted personnel. So I consider myself representing the enlisted men in the services. I recall vividly in boot camp during World War II, when I was in the service, we called it basic training. In basic training, the man that I feared the most was my sergeant. I didn't care about the officers, the majors and colonels. I never came in contact with them anyway. But that sergeant. The sergeant was telling me, he said, Private Anderson, you don't address a non-commissioned officer as sir. Yes, sir, Sergeant, sir. fire around us and what I tell you. So that's where it was with me. In 1941, when the war began, all eligible men 18 and older were required to sign up for the draft, to be drafted into the military. When the war began in 1941, I was 16. And when I became 18, I signed up. Being obedient to the law, I signed up. And within 3 months' time, I was drafted into the military to receive my boot training at Keesler Field, Mississippi. After boot camp, basic training, I was sent to Chanute Field, Illinois, for aircraft maintenance training. Now, for your information, the pilots, like Bill Fontroy on my left here, the pilots were sent to Tuskegee, Alabama. There at Tuskegee, Alabama, they had the classroom, Tuskegee Institute for classroom study. They also had Morton Field there for the pilots to be trained how to fly planes. So the pilots went to Tuskegee. The enlisted personnel, like myself, went to Chanute Field, Illinois, not too far from Chicago, for our training. My training was an aircraft sheet metal worker, and my occupation was to repair bullet holes of aircraft. So the maintenance crew, which I was a part of, our job was to keep the planes flying. I was stationed at Gardner Field, Kentucky, and most of my time at Gardner Field most of my time in the military was spent at Gardner Field, Kentucky, 1944 to 1945. The unit of the group that I was assigned to was the 477th Bomber Group, which General Benjamin Davis later became the commanding officer of that group. The 477th Bomber Group never saw action. Before we completed our training, the war was coming to an end. So the 477th Bomber Group remained stateside during the entirety of the war. I was discharged for the convenience of the government in 1945. And that is my career with the military.
Thank you. Gentlemen, I have another question for each one of you in turn. I'd like to ask you, what is your most vivid memory of serving in the military? I'd like to start with Mr. Pryde. Go to Pryde, please. Sir, your most vivid memory?
My most vivid memory was during the gunnery school at Central Field, Florida. We started off with a shotgun shooting skeet. During the training, we ended up shooting skeet out of the back end of a truck, just so you could learn to shoot things while you were moving. On one particular day, I made 50 out of 50. And I thought I was going to be a hot thing. I went back to the squadron and said, hey, you got the day off from gunnery school because you did so well. You got KP tomorrow. But gunnery was something that I enjoyed. That was one of the two technical schools that I finished. The other was a radio operator, maintenance guy. I flew 1,600 hours during World War II. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Fontroy, your poignant memory?
solo. My instructor, Cecil Ryan, after 8 hours of teaching me, asked me to pull up to the tee out in the middle of the field. At Moton Field was just a field. It didn't have runways, just a grass field. And we pulled up to the tee. He got out of the PT-13D, stood on the grass and looked up at me, and go on up there and kill yourself. I took off, because I knew what to do. I took off, went through the pattern, came down, bounced all over the place. Never landed, just kept going. I came back and landed properly, because he had taught me to do that. And I pulled up to the tee to pick him up. He said, no, 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 go on up and kill yourself. So that was one of the things that I remember. After you solo, with 2 more days, you have to shoot 3 landings at the airport. I shot those 3 landings, and on the 4th day, they said, you go out, you're on your own. I'm supposed to go out and practice what they taught me. But believe me, that first hour out there, all I did was ride and look and think how proud my mother would be to see her little boy flying an airplane.
Dr. Ware?
Well, thinking back, I think the memory that I cherish the most occurred when I was in Korea. It was a night when I was assigned to be the officer of the day. And as night was approaching, my responsibility to be in charge of the flag detail. All of you know, in handling the flag, this is a very significant task, and you're very meticulous in carrying out that responsibility. So happened that the headquarters for the Air Force and the headquarters for the Army were side by side. And when you went up on the top of the roof to lower the flag, each one had its own flag. They were on the adjacent ends. So I could look right across to the next building, and there was an Army lieutenant who was doing the same thing that I was doing. He was in charge of the flag detail to lower the flag. As they played the notes and the flag was lowered, it struck me that I was the person representing all of the people in Korea. They were hard at work doing their jobs. My duty to safeguard the flag and to represent them. So I felt an unusual feeling. I can't really describe it. And witnessing the flag come down, I may have held that salute a little longer than I've ever held a salute, because it struck me that we were here many thousands of miles from home doing our duty. That was significant to me.
Ladies and gentlemen, at this point in time, in order to keep our program moving, I have a few brief comments I'd like to make, and then we're going to close. We, the members of the East Coast chapter of the Tuskegee Airmen, thank you for joining us this morning. I'd like to impress upon you that we are still in service to our country today. The mission now is to expose our youth to education opportunities, specifically within the aviation realm. To achieve our goals, we have established a youth and aviation program where we expose youth to career opportunities in aviation. We currently operate a flight school, aircraft maintenance training facilities, and an air traffic control exposure class to enlighten our youth. We also provide educational grants to college-bound students through our scholarship programs. Please continue to support us and follow us online at ecti.org, ecctai.org, as we work to enlighten our youth to the opportunities that education opens in their futures and to promote the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to go ahead and thank you for your time with us today personally, and a round of applause for all of our panelists. Thank you for joining us.